All right, let's just jump right in. We are talking about a man whose name, Jacob, literally means deceiver. I mean, this guy is a con artist, a trickster, and he has just completely blown up his family. But as he's on the run, literally fearing for his life, he has this encounter that's going to change everything, not just for him, but for an entire nation to come. And this is where it all kicks off. Not with some noble hero, but with the raw, gut-wrenching anger of a betrayed brother. You can just feel the rage in Esau's words, right? This isn't just some sibling spat. This is a deep, painful wound that has shattered their family. So that brings us to the big question, the one we're really going to wrestle with today. How does a guy who is this flawed, this manipulative, end up being one of the most important figures in this whole grand divine plan? I mean, it seems completely backwards, but that's what makes this story so fascinating. To really get why Jacob is in such a desperate spot, we have to rewind a bit and look at the family feud that started it all. And, this wasn't just some random argument. This was a rivalry that had been brewing since the day these two were born. So Esau mentions two specific betrayals. First, you've got the birthright. Jacob sees his brothers starving and basically trades him a bowl of lentil soup for the entire family inheritance. It's just an unbelievably opportunistic move. But the second one, wow, that was even worse. He literally disguised himself, put on animal skins to fool his blind, dying father Isaac into giving him the family blessing. That is just a cold, calculated, personal betrayal. Now here's the thing. Esau's anger wasn't just him venting. No. He made a clear, cold-hearted plan. The minute their father, Isaac, was gone, he was going to murder his brother Jacob. For Esau, this was already a done deal. And that death threat? Well, it changes everything. Jacob goes from being the clever deceiver to a flat-out fugitive. He has to run from his home, run from the promised land, and run from the twin brother who wants to kill him. So his mom, Rebecca, the one who actually came up with the whole blessing-stealing scheme, now has to figure out how to save him. But she can't exactly tell her husband, Isaac, the real reason, right? So she invents this cover story, saying she's just so sick of the local Canaanite women and really wants Jacob to go find a proper wife from their own people. She is absolutely terrified she's about to lose both of her sons in one day. And Isaac buys it. Hook, line, and sinker. He officially commands Jacob to leave and even blesses him again on his way out. Now think about the tension here. The guy who was promised this land is now being kicked out of the land. It really makes you wonder, is God's promise even going to hold up? And here is the absolutely tragic twist in all of this. Rebecca told Jacob, hey, just go for a few days, just until your brother cools off. Well, those few days turned into 20 long years. She never saw her favorite son ever again. Okay, so this brings us to the absolute core of the story. You have to picture this. Jacob is totally alone. He's a wanted man out in the middle of nowhere. He has literally nothing to his name. And it's right here, at his absolute lowest point, that something impossible happens. He gets to, as the Bible calls it, a certain place. The text really emphasizes that word place. It's meant to sound totally random and insignificant. He's exhausted, he grabs a rock to use as a pillow. I mean, how uncomfortable is that? And he just passes out. It is the most ordinary setting you could imagine for what's about to happen. And in his dream, he sees this unbelievable vision. It's a stairway, or maybe a ramp, and it connects the very ground he's sleeping on all the way up into the heavens. I mean, just think about that image. It's a bridge, a direct connection between God's world and our world. And it gets better. On this stairway, there are angels, messengers of God, and they're constantly moving up and down. They're not just hanging out, they are active, they're on a mission. This isn't a static painting. It's a living, breathing connection between heaven and earth, and it's happening right there. And then, the climax of the whole vision, right there at the top of it all, or maybe even right there beside him on the ground, stands God himself. Not some symbol, not an angel, but God. The deceiver, the fugitive, is now face to face with the creator of the universe. And this wasn't just a silent movie. God speaks. He speaks directly to Jacob. And what he says is absolutely mind-blowing. He basically takes the family covenant, this huge promise made to Jacob's grandpa, Abraham, and he gives it in person to this guy on the run. It's interesting, when Isaac first blessed Jacob, he called on El Shaddai, God Almighty. This was the name the patriarchs used when they were talking about God's raw power to make his promises come true, no matter how impossible things looked. And that power is about to be put on full display. So God just lays it all out for him, this incredible 4-part promise. First, he says, the very land you're sleeping on, this is going to be yours. Second, your family, your descendants will be as countless as the dust of the earth. Third, and this one is cosmic, through you and your family, all the peoples of the earth will be blessed. And finally, and this is probably the most important one for Jacob right now, I am with you. I will watch over you wherever you go. So Jacob doesn't just wake up, stretch, and say, wow, what a weird dream. No, this thing hits him like a ton of bricks. It completely changes him, and his response is immediate and physical. He wakes up, and he is totally freaked out. It's this mix of pure terror and absolute awe. He says, surely the Lord is in this place, and I had no idea. He realizes this wasn't just some random patch of dirt. This was holy ground. This was, as he calls it, the gate of heaven. And because of that, he gives the place a new name. It's not just a certain place anymore. He calls it Bethel, which in Hebrew literally means house of God. He completely redefines this spot based on what just happened to him there. Then he does something really cool. He takes that stone he was using for a pillow, that symbol of his rock bottom moment, and he stands it up as a pillar and he pours oil on it. This is a profound act of worship. It's a monument marking the spot where heaven and earth met. And it's a powerful statement of faith that he believes he will come back. And finally, Jacob makes a vow. Now, it's really important we get this right. This is not him trying to bargain with God, like, okay, God, if you do your part, then I'll do mine. No, this is a response of pure loyalty. It's his way of saying, okay, I'm in. You are my God. It's his personal acceptance of the whole promise. So, when you boil it all down, you get this incredibly powerful theme. Jacob is a mess. His family is a disaster of dysfunction and deception. They fail over and over. And yet, none of that, not one bit of it, is enough to stop God's plan. His grace, his promises, they just roll right over all that human failure. And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? This whole story shows God's purpose working not just in spite of Jacob's flaws, but right through them. So if that's true, if grace can work through people that broken, what does that say about the potential in any of us, no matter what our own mess-ups look like?